Great. Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to this conversation with Clive Hyland. My name is Veronika Hofmann. I am one of the happiness advisors here at the Happiness Index. The Happiness Index helps organizations measure the key employee engagement and happiness drivers to power their people strategy. And we're here today to talk about neuroscience for HR. And who would be better than Clive Hyland to help us have this conversation and have a really in-depth chat about how neuroscience can help the HR professionals and just in general the world of management. He is here with us to celebrate the launch of the new edition of Neuro Edge, not just a book, but the book when it comes to neuroscience and HR, and connecting the dots between our brain, how our brain works, how we think, how we feel. Clive is the head of neuroscience at the Happiness Index and has a whole array of other roles and talents. So thank you so much for being here today, Clive. It's a pleasure to have you and to be in conversation with you after meeting in person yesterday for the first time and having a really interesting afternoon talking about neuroscience and different areas and systems of the brain. So we'll be having a deep dive conversation to answer your questions on what neuroscience means for the HR community. And as a former HR director, COO and CEO, Clive is perfectly positioned to relate how neuroscience can help the HR profession meet the challenges of the future of work and provide new approaches about how to manage teams and employees. So welcome, Clive.
Hi, good afternoon. Good to be part of the conversation. So let's go for it when you're ready.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, first of all, how are you doing today?
I am good. I've been playing walking football this morning, so I feel physically fit and relaxed and ready to use my brain.
Great. I heard about that in one of your previous conversations with Matt Phelan, that you were part of the Welsh walking football team and represented Wales internationally as well.
Yeah, it sounds grand, doesn't it? But I'll take it anyway, whatever it is.
That's brilliant. Exciting. So Clive, the Neuro Edge was your first book, which you published about 5 years ago. And since then, you've also written another book, The Quantum Way, which came out last year. Can you share a little bit with us about the reason for re-releasing this new version of the Neuro Edge?
Yeah. It's actually my second book because I first of all wrote a book about coaching more specifically, and the three books interestingly map my journey into the depths of science that's involved. And the reason for re-releasing the Neuro Edge, I think, is to bring it into the Happiness Index fold. It's like a prequel to the Quantum Way. And there was certain extra stuff that I wanted to include in it, which was relevant to the role that the Happiness Index are trying to take on, with certain societal implications as well. It's not just about business. This is about doing the right thing. So we brought it into the fold as part then of the Happiness Index library, and hopefully, more and more people within the Happiness Index community will check out the book. And that means we've got a nice place for conversations.
Great. I mean, that's really interesting because something that is widely taught in the HR community, and when you're becoming an HR professional, learning to become an HR professional, is psychological models and frameworks. And neuroscience is an incredibly new way of approaching human resource and employee management systems. What's new about neuroscience and how does it differ from psychology?
Okay, so that's a perfectly reasonable question, and the fundamental breakthrough came in the 1990s with the development of imaging technology. Most people know about MRI scans, so that meant that we could look into the brain for the first time. And psychology during the 20th century didn't have that advantage. You could only slice brains up after people were dead or work with animals. So basically, it was a case of Now a whole new layer of insight was becoming available to us because we could see what was actually happening. So neuroscience is less theoretical. It's built on a harder evidence base and has thrown up insights which are intriguing and powerful in terms of what we need to do with the next level of understanding of humanity and how that applies in organizations. And no doubt we'll touch on some of that as we go through. So it's a harder science, which I know can be scary, but we'll come back to that because it doesn't need to be. It's more reliable, but that doesn't mean to say we leave psychology behind. We don't. We use the good stuff. And some of the models that people are familiar with, people like myself update. We give them a neuroscience flair, and some stand up well, really, meet that test, and others don't. So, that's part of the process, is what now stands the test, the neuroscientific test that becomes more reliable.
Okay, so when we look at the practicalities of it, how accessible is neuroscience as a tool to guide HR professionals?
Okay, so let me very much, think back to my HR days. My first 10 or 11 years of my career were in HR. And part of the reason I was lucky to get the chance to move on into the business world as well, to combine that experience. Obviously, somebody spotted something in me that they felt would work. But I was part of that. Part of my reason for moving on was I felt we were too boxed in HR, and we could contribute to have a lot more. And I think that comes back now to the neuroscience, because there's a major plea from me, which is to say, look, please don't be scared of the title. Neuroscience can be a scary title, but when you start to break it down into what we're actually looking at, it's actually very accessible. And we talk about things that people will get and can look out for on a daily basis. So move beyond the boundary. People like myself do the hard work in terms of translating the neuroscience. I wouldn't wish on you having to go directly into the neuroscience community and try and work that lot out. I've been motivated enough to do that, but I can take it to a principle level and an insight level, which I know and I can explain is reliable, but that then is immediately relevant to the workplace.
Well, Clive, you have worked with a lot of, and I'm thinking what you've just said, how to translate that into communicating it with your senior leadership team. You've worked with a lot of, and are working with a lot of organizational presidents, CEOs, and professionals, coaching them, supporting them. How can HR professionals use neuroscience to influence their company at a board level? So how can this approach be communicated? There's a lot of HR trends that come and go.
Yeah.
Why do you think neuroscience is here to stay? And how can we communicate that in the best and most eloquent way?
Well, it's very clear that it's here to stay because if you look in clinical areas, there is more and more neuroscience being used, for things like treatment of autism, just as one example. As some of the frailties of some of the psychological approaches are not taken as far enough. But in the organizational space, it's again back to this point that this is accessible. And I've heard so many times the standard comment, our people are our major asset, our most important asset. And yet we expect people to put up with so much that isn't necessary, so many barriers that we create in organizations, and intentionally, because we box people in. And fundamentally, what this is about is sort of recognizing what is the natural environment in which people can give of their best, because people want to. It's built into us to perform and to get validation for that performance. But if we're boxed off and are controlled by rules and hierarchies, then fundamentally we're in survival mode. And survival mode means that we haven't got access to our total brain and to the wider intelligence system. So we're naturally suboptimized in terms of what we can contribute. So there's stuff coming out now at neuroscience, which helps us understand the mistakes of the past. We've ended up in a cul-de-sac through traditional approaches, which have been very cognitively biased. It's all about rationality in organizations and rules and control. And now what we're talking about, hold on a minute, is that is not the environment in which people thrive. And we're in the game of creating thriving cultures. So that's the essence of it. So the pitch to the board is very much, the way you treat your people today is tomorrow's performance. You may not always see that specifically on the balance sheet or the P&L, but it's there. And thank God, what you don't see is missed opportunity measured financially, because if you did, you'd be embarrassed, is my opinion, right? Because we all know we can give more, both personally and collectively. And what we started to do is open this up and spot opportunities for doing exactly that.
Definitely. I'm thinking in particular over the last 3 years, we have been in this collective stressor state, this collective survival mode that is still in some shape or form, in some areas more than in others, quite prevalent at the moment. And it will take us a while until we are easing out of that, and then there might be something new that we can come into. How can companies, and maybe you can go into the survival mode and the thrive mode specifically, how can companies use this approach to create cultures that allow employees to thrive?
Okay, so if we talk of it in terms of the type of architecture that we use within the happiness index, that's exactly what we've done. We start with an understanding of the brain. And, this makes it very accessible for people. It's not scary science, right? And we talk about the 4 major systems in the brain that influence our behavior. And that's the world of instincts and emotions, rational thought, and reflective thought, okay? So we get into that stuff. Now, I understand that for people in the business, they in HR, they say, well, how do you manage or influence instincts in the business? So we have to take it to another level to make it more accessible. So we in the happiness index, back up with science to the degree that people want to know about it. But there's a level to which, if you buy a car, fundamentally, you buy it because of the driving experience and because it can get you somewhere, right? You don't need to know the details of what's under the bonnet, the engine, right? But what we're talking about, we've put the engine there that can drive the data and give the insights that people need to take their organizations forward. So what we then do is break these brain systems down into much more familiar areas. So for instincts, what we're talking about essentially is feeling safe in an organization and the opportunity, the freedom to grow, okay? Being authentic. They are the 2 things that trigger our instincts. Either we triggered into survival mode because we don't feel safe. So how good are we helping people to stay safe? Or secondly, if we spot an opportunity to grow, that's part of our evolutionary instinct. We want to grow, otherwise we would have stopped evolving. So that'll grab us in a positive sense. So we can measure those 2 things. When you move into the emotion space, so emotions are more generally recognized. But again, we distill that down into 2 key areas where we ask our questions and provide the insights. And one of those is about acknowledgement, and the other one is relationships. Excuse me. So acknowledgement is fundamental. The emotional system of the brain needs to bond with others. So it will look for feedback on a consistent basis, subconsciously, most of this stuff, to know whether it's on the right path, to know whether it belongs. It's a fundamental need in all of us. So understanding that sense of acknowledgement, am I okay? Am I in the right place, is really important. And of course, the basis of that is relationships. Our emotions were created in an evolutionary sense to enable us to cooperate with others, because reptiles don't cooperate. And this is the mammalian brain that is all about cooperation. So again, we can break it down. Emotions, we are talking about acknowledgement and relationships, okay? When we get into the rational space, what the rational brain is interested in doing is getting things done. It wants to know what the rules are. So what we focus on then is clarity and enablement. Very practical questions. Clarity is it absolutely clear what I'm supposed to be doing here? Because that's what the rational brain needs. And then once I know what I need to do, can I do it? Do I have the tools? Do I have the resources? Do I have the space, etc., to do it? So that, again, very accessible things, clarity in an organization and this enablement. When you look at the last piece of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the reflective system in the brain, that's more about moving forward. So people, it's about meaning and purpose. We focus on that on the one hand, and the opportunity for personal growth. That's very much our thrive instinct, and it's then all about people Do they feel a sense of moving forward? Can they personalize the vision in the business? Can they feel that? Does it create a buzz for them so that they want to put their emotional energy into following that journey? So that's the type of stuff. And so fundamentally, it means that once we've already broken it down, I think people will recognize those themes we're talking about, meaning and purpose and safety and all that. And that enables us to ask questions about each of those areas so we can see where leadership needs to put its attention. You cannot address everything. And what traditional corporate organizations have been very poor at is handling emotions in particular. Because we didn't sort of have the tools and we had theories that were a bit flaky. But now we're starting to really see the world of emotions and how we can influence it. You'll never control it because our emotions are much more powerful than our thoughts, and they happen a lot quicker in terms of brain reaction. We get instincts and emotions first and thoughts come along later, slower, for a good reason, right? So that means, we can never mentally control ourselves entirely. But there are things we can do to create much better balances across those different needs so that people are in a good place and are able and want to contribute.
That's brilliant. And I mean, we've already seen a really valuable development in HR trends away from segregating the personal self and the work self and combining it and having a more holistic approach to how we're supposed to manage people, because we can't just switch our emotions that have to do with family and personal life off. Yep. And switch our, especially right now where we're working, where we're living, where we have our families running, like children, sometimes pets, etc., running back and forth, introducing our colleagues to the world that we live in, our private life, the intimate areas of where we live more than ever before. Yep. It's a window into who we are outside of work.
I'll make a point on that because to reinforce it, because we do not have the ability to choose our emotions. They are. So anyone that has negative judgment around the fact that we feel completely misses the point. We feel the way we do for good reasons. The question then is, what are we going to do about that feeling? So acknowledgement of that feeling and how we negotiate with it to keep it in the right place so it remains productive. That's part of this learning process. So there's an important need. What we're trying to do here is build awareness of the human dynamic, all the things we've missed up until now. We've got certain things right, but we got a lot wrong. Okay, we're coming back to the HR function. They're in such an incredibly important role in this. They can choose to let it pass them by, big mistake, or they can become the people experts in an organization. Because when you are a line manager and you're doing the frontline stuff, there's a lot of stuff to do, right? And you're under a lot of pressure in most cases. You need the people experts alongside you to come in and not tell you how to do it, but help you discover the right ways to get the best out of yourself and your team, etc. And that's what HR needs to be doing. Because the implication, moving towards, the neuroscience value that we understand and moving in a quantum direction, which is the other book, The Quantum Way, is really all about getting the best out of your people. The organization is there to support the people, not the other way around, which is what is usually the case. We're slotted into boxes, or into procedures and systems. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have any of those. You have to have a certain amount, but it needs to be light touch. Because people need something different in order to thrive. And when they thrive, they can give so much more. And that's not just an opinion, it can be measured in scientific terms. It's called power spectral density. But that's not the point. People are not going to come and ask me a question about power spectral density, right? I know it's there. I know it's under the bonnet. Right? They will get it intuitively because when the heart and the brain and the gut are aligned, we're at our best. That's when we move into the zone because the whole body is focused on a particular type of outcome and immerses itself in that task. So they're all the sort of insights around here. But HR should be on the right hand of the top guys, men or women in an organization that need that extra level of expertise to really understand the dynamic of their organization and how they get the best out of it. It shouldn't any longer be around how do we change the structure again. So that we got different boxes and we think everything's going to change. Nah, All that normally means is you swap one set of problems for another set of problems. There's a better way, and that's what we're discovering now, and it's a fantastic opportunity for the HR profession to do that. And my plea is, please don't be afraid of the science. Come in and walk through those initial barriers, and you'll see a whole new world of insight waiting for you.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a scary world, but if it's broken down into really easily digestible chunks of information. I mean, I'm learning a lot about neuroscience at the moment, and since starting to work for the Happiness Index, and it's so fascinating. And when it's coming together, how much we really gain an understanding into how people behave and feel and think.
You'll relate to this, Veronika. I mean, I see it regularly, when I run workshops, which is the best way to do things, because it gives people a chance to play with the material and to personalize it, which is really important. You don't have to understand everything. It's like what's important to you. But you can see the amount of processing that goes on around the room. People are literally eyes agog, taking it all in. There's very little resistance. Occasionally, of course, people are a bit confused. Well, that's not what I previously understood, and we work our way through that, right? But the general response is, wow, so that's how it works. And that makes so much sense. Because it's almost like we've brought the science to the table that explains things like intuition. The stuff we knew before at a deeper level, but we couldn't rely on, and we couldn't share it because we didn't have the language, and it just felt like an opinion. But what we have now is a basis that sort of says, no, your gut feel is probably right there. Let's just bring it to the surface a bit more and understand what you're saying and why you're saying it. And then we can check in with the team and see if they feel the same way. It's a different type of language. So the whole HR community is all about building that, coaching, mentoring, facilitation type support to allow people at the front line to be at their best.
Clive, in order to be able to successfully implement this approach towards HR, the organization needs to have a culture where, like you said, people feel psychologically safe, but also a culture where you're able to be vulnerable, right? Yes. Talking about these new ways of approaching management and supporting employees requires some vulnerability, because your change management, once you're introducing an approach like this one, and the approach that the Happiness Index has, for example, what do you think is, or how can organizations best communicate this new approach to their employees and create a culture from the start where they set the scene for that work, in terms of how do they allow for the vulnerability and the psychological safety that is needed in order for this program to be successful?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, you can't create a culture. It just happens, okay? So you're never at the starting point. In reality, you're always dealing with something that already exists. But obviously, what you can do is change the flow of that culture and develop it in a more constructive way. And nobody at the top can do that. It has to be done by everyone. So clearly, this is about explaining the principles to people so that they get why it is a different approach. And of course, you're going to get skepticism at first, because exactly as you've said, there have been so many incredible theories come along that are going to solve everything, and they don't work, right? So this is not rational. It's not transactional. It's much deeper than that. But that doesn't mean it's scary. And in fact, people intuitively get it. All of a sudden, they've seen something in front of them that makes so much more sense, provided it's explained in the right way. And if I put that in the context of, we're hopefully at the back end of the COVID experience, for all the awful things about COVID, what it's done is accelerate the need for change in business, because, the world came along and changed the rules. We have all been put, in an emotional space, right? And an instinctive space, which has triggered fear, things like that. So people are now going to go back to work with different expectations and with different needs. And part of that will be a sense of vulnerability, to a degree, and that varies a lot for everyone else. So a key example is, how do you build trust in organizations or rebuild trust against that new set of expectations? And trust is always a great place to start. So, vulnerability per se, why do we want to share our vulnerability? Because it's scary being isolated. It's pretty scary sharing it as well. So it's like you've got to find ways working with your workforce, with your people, to find what the right balance is for your organization. But, it's not just about vulnerability. It's about all the things that underpin it, but ultimately it's about people being authentic. So they can say, I'm not feeling great at the moment. I realize I've still got my job to do and I'm still going to give it my best. But, the implication is a little bit of team support during this time would be very much appreciated for me. And people don't do that, do they? Typically, any show of weakness has been condemned as you're not up to the job. So hold it to yourself, stay isolated, and just focus on survival. What we're saying, it doesn't need to be that way. We're saying is that all people have times in their life where they feel vulnerable or emotionally down. We're not talking about organizations being therapy centers, but we are recognizing the fact that the human emotion itself is not a linear experience. You cannot plot it on a graph and say, we're 7 out of 10 now, we're going to be 8 out of 10 in a year's time. That's so wrong. And that was the essence of so many surveys. So there is a mindset shift now, which is sort of saying, look, think about I'm a great believer, you always look to nature to tell us the way it should be done, right? And when you look at the body itself, the brain and the body and the total intelligence system, that has the right data available all of the time. It doesn't do a 12-month survey or a 6-month survey and ask itself, fairly superficial, meaningless questions. It has what really matters coming into a central point so it can work out the best way to keep the body and that organism moving forward. And it's the same principle when you use surveys, etc., within organizations to say, keep on top of this data. And by the way, if people are feeling pretty down in the organization, the important thing is to know it, not to feel that it's a negative result and you're doing something wrong and, oh God, we've all got to cover our backs now because there's going to be trouble. It's saying we know what's going on, so let's try to understand it better and what can we do about it? Which is massively different to constantly massaging results so everything looks fine. We are never always fine. We want to maximize the opportunities for being fine, and we want to do that in an organization, and that means working with the human dynamic. Sorry, you may get the point that I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, so you've got a job to shut me up. I know.
No, not at all. This is what we're here for, and I feel like I'm talking to the right person about these things that I also wonder about every single day. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot over the last few months is how organizations supporting their employees and learning more about themselves and their own strengths and how their brain works in terms of mental health, but also physical health and emotional health influences the way they show up at work as managers, as team leaders, but also just as employees in any type of position, and how important that self-knowledge is in order to understand the neuroscience and the way we behave at work.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's the base from which we respond, so a general climate which encourages self-awareness and encourages things like constructive feedback is really important. So feedback, let's take it as just a nice practical example. We will flourish if we are presented feedback in a constructive way. Okay. Now, in most organizations, certainly if they're systemized, a lot of the feedback feels negative, like appraisals and things like that. It feels like, okay, the first thing I want to know is has anyone marked me down or criticized me? Okay. That's the survival instinct kicking in. What we want is a situation where it's completely normal to be swapping feedback and have your teammates, let's call it that loosely, in a position where they can be honest with each other. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. Okay? If you've got a history of mistrust or of misunderstanding, you have to invest in the relationships which allow trust to grow. But then it becomes self-fulfilling because, when people are able to say things to each other that are point out, maybe something could have been done better, but people are not hurt by it, then you've got a platform in which you can grow. And that is absolutely achievable. And this is a great example, I think, of where HR can make a manifest difference to an organization, is to coach critical people in the business to be able to handle, both receive and deliver feedback at the time when we need it. Wait until the end of the year, is back to the heart analogy again, to find out how you're doing is rubbish. You need that on a constant basis. And you need to know, did I have a good game today? Or did I not play so well? 90% of the time, you know yourself. So it's only reinforcement. But if you don't get it, then we retreat into isolation and we start playing our own game rather than the team game, because we're hanging on to that in the survival mode. So massive opportunities, for getting real teamwork built on a basis of trust.
Definitely. Well, Clive, you've had a whole myriad of really valuable positions as HR director, COO, CEO. What do you wish you'd known about neuroscience at that time?
Yeah, all of this. I wanted to know all of it. Yeah, it is a lot. I think some of this stuff I knew intuitively. And this is going to be the experience for a lot of people. It's like, well, I knew that. But the difference is you can start trusting it because you can see, if you want to, the science that sits behind it. So it's not just a hunch or another theory. It's a more consistent base that you can build. And I think the second thing is then you've got a language you can share. When we didn't have such reliable insights available to us, we were all left with our opinions. And that's left with, resulted in a lot of disappointments along the way, where people felt the things are going to change and they didn't. Okay. And understanding, for instance, that we are emotionally driven beings is one of the key insights. So it takes 80 milliseconds to register an emotion in the brain. It takes 250 milliseconds to register a thought. And the implications of that are huge. Our thoughts always come later. So understanding dynamics like that helps us to explain some behaviors. It helps us to understand ourselves, to understand our impact on others, and to understand their impact on us. And then you start creating this trust and this communication base, which is so much more productive. See, what we can't measure at the moment in a commercial sense is all the missed opportunities, where we've failed to cooperate in the way that we could. And that's what this is addressing. So I would want all of this stuff, because I could have taken it with conviction to more people and say, this is what we're doing wrong, and this is what we're going to do to get it right.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, what if you could, let's say, go back to being an HR director and help new managers who start at the organization where you HR director really embrace the freedom to be human approach? How would you try to onboard them into that mindset? What do you think? What little elements? And I'm going off piece a little bit here, but I think it's important to look at the practicalities of how do we communicate to our managers, this is the approach that we have, and this is how we want you to lead your team and to lead your department?
Well, I think most people in those positions understand that things have to change. We can't carry on the way we are with so much corporate stress in organizations. It's just not a natural state. We don't have to be this stressed. Okay, things can be a lot different. So when you're searching for a better solution, is the appeal from me, I think, when you're dealing with neuroscience is, again, get beyond the neuroscience and listen to what it's telling us, because it will tell us things that we already believe, but it brings it to the table in a way that can be supported and explained to more people with a more rational approach. I'm more than comfortable whether people take this on, but intuitively, emotionally, rationally, whatever it is they need to do. But actually, it lifts us. It helps us. It like gives us hope in a way that actually, okay, I can see why we're stuck, and I'm starting to see what we can do to get away from it. And then it's a case of, once you've engaged people, such as leaders, instinctively, so they start to feel it. It's not another theoretical manual. They start to feel it. Then you got something to work on. So My appeal to those people is look at it, really explore it, not just rationally, give it time. And I say to everyone, it's a case of finding out within it what you believe in. Because if you find the bits you believe in, and I don't think that's hard, but it's the bits that matter and resonate most with you, that's what you communicate. Because when you communicate with belief, you actually transmit resonant energy. And resonant energy attracts people. It pulls them in because it makes them feel good. If you're just doing something that's theoretical and going by a script, it is simply a rational explanation. And that does nothing for our instincts and our emotions. So yeah, they're left cold. They may do it because they feel some sort of onus to follow the rules, but they'll all believe it's going to fail. And that's why it does. So, and that's part, so I could be talking about that in a very instinctive and opinionated sense, but the science shows us just how important things like belief are, so why wouldn't you get into this stuff and help and get a whole new set of tools that are allowing you to focus on the things you already knew, but you just couldn't get there.
And at the end of the day, it's to make it about the DNA, organizational DNA that is that creates the health of the organization and the culture, and not just band-aids here and there, but it's about really changing the approach and holistically looking at living and incorporating this freedom to be human approach into every single aspect of the organization.
Yeah, if you create the environment where people can perform, they will.
Because we all want to.
Yep.
We all want to perform. We want to do a great job, have a sense of belonging, have a sense of purpose, meaning, etc. And that it's that trust piece again, right? Trusting that the employees that you hire are there because they want to do a great job and they don't want to be under the stress. Burnout is a huge, huge problem at the moment, or for a while now. And I know that in a few companies, mental health is only talked about once people are starting to burn out. Yes. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, which you mentioned during our Neuroscience Academy yesterday, is and again, it might be slight of piece, but you said that when we look at another person, there's about 1,000 different data points that our brain receives just looking at someone's face. And this is a bridge to my last question, but when we sit in front of a screen in a meeting looking at someone else, we're missing out on a lot of really crucial data points, right? Because we don't see the 3D, the 3 dimensions of a face, body language, etc., which is our main communication tool, our body. How much do you think, on one hand, how much do you think that has influenced us over the last few years, where we have all moved away from being in person, or a lot of us have moved away from being in person with our colleagues? And how much do you think that human and emotional element has been missed out? And how can neuroscience influence strategies around remote working and returning to work in that way as well, with creating those really valuable connections that we need?
Nice simple question then. Yeah, I mean, let's try and simplify it as an answer, because it has been a difficult time for people, and you're right. I think my experience of like Zoom calls and their equivalents is but basically the same as everyone else. I mean, it started off by real appreciation because we hadn't lost contact altogether, which is really important, and opened up a global audience, because it doesn't matter where you were then. So there still are some great advantages around information exchange. But again, that is a rational process. And what it lacks is the emotional engagement. And as you say, looking at a screen, yes, we will pick a certain amount up visually. Yeah, we can do that, but we can't feel it. And we need to feel things, because that's what creates inspiration in us. And that's what creates excitement and connection. So, how we manage that hybrid going forward is really important. People do need to get together in order to bond. Does that mean that they've got together every day? That's what businesses have to decide. But, looking at all the downtime associated with commuting and things like that are obvious gains that can be made. And I think there are very few people that would want to give up entirely the flexibility that they've now found out about through working from home. So the rules have changed. And now it's that balancing act. But, isolation is not only unhealthy, ultimately it's dangerous. So we need to bring people back together so they get the right energetic experience around their work. And each organization has to find its right way of doing that. And that's nothing to do with the rational space. It's what we feel when we're together, so that we can bounce off each other and we feel like we belong. And a screen can't give you that.
Definitely. Well, Clive, this has been an amazing conversation. My mind is poof. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thanks for introducing us into the world of neuroscience and how it can help us in the world of HR and how we can connect it. Just before we go, I'd really love to know, what do you love about what you do, Clive?
This feels like a Columbo moment, it's just leaving the room, and it's just before I go. But ask me the question again, sorry.
What do you love about what you do?
Everything. No, and literally, I'm not being simplistic there, because it's like putting on a different pair of glasses. I see life differently, and so many things make so much sense to me now. And that's why I should have retired by now. Look at me. I'm an old guy, right? But I can't, because this is too important. It needs to be shared. More and more people are starting to get into it, starting to understand it. So I'm committed to this. And anyone who wants to listen, who wants to contribute, I'm there for them, because this has got so much to offer.
Definitely. It's a really exciting time for human resource, for managing people, for seeing them who they are as multidimensional human beings who are all unique and complex and who have a lot of potential. And it's about providing a space where we can really allow people to thrive.
Cool. I could have said that.
That's brilliant. Good. Clive, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening in today and joining our webinars. Do get in touch if you have any questions. I would love to talk you through the Happiness Index platform and what we do, and show you the practicalities of how, as a company, you can deploy what we've just talked about in the conversation with Clive, how neuroscience and the neuroscience approach can help you create a people strategy centered around happiness and engagement. So great. Thank you, everyone. And have a lovely afternoon.
Okay. Take care. Bye.